Hi. Well, we continue with chapter 5 today as John's vision of the heavenly throne continues with new things that appear to him. Let's listen to the first verse or two and then we'll go back and look at the big picture. Then I saw in the right hand of the one seated on the throne a scroll, written on the inside and on the back, sealed with 7 seals. And I saw a mighty angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and break its seals?" And so, is this a new scene or the same scene? Well, of course, it's the same throne room, but the scroll is now there, and in a moment there'll be a lamb. Are we to expect this to be things that appeared out of nowhere, or is it a matter of John looking more deeply? As we see in that very first verse, it doesn't suggest that the scroll suddenly appeared, but that now he saw it, perhaps overwhelmed by the awe and majesty and power and lightning and thunder and flashing light and fire around the throne. He couldn't possibly take it in all at one time, any more than readers of Revelation can take in the whole vision on one read. And there's a lesson to be learned there, both about reading Revelation, but also about life. That our experience of the sacred or our experience of empire usually doesn't explain to us what's going on in our immediate experience. We need to reflect on it. We need to look again and again and again and to let it resonate and sink in until it becomes something that we've seen from every angle and can really come to understand it and incorporate it into our being. So we'll see that a number of times throughout Revelation. We're only going to look at the first 7 verses in this episode, as you can see on the screen, just that section. And as Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza has pointed out, the chapter has an emotional roller coaster. It starts off with this question, and then, as you can see on the screen, by verse 4, John begins to weep bitterly. So it's very sad that there seems to be a question that has a negative answer. And yet it ends, as we'll see in next episode, with the second of our heavenly liturgies, where the Lamb joins the one on the throne to be worthy to receive praise and glory, etc. What we're seeing here is the core of really the whole question of what is this seal, what is this scroll that's sealed with 7 seals, and what is it about the Lamb, of course referring to Jesus, although he's not mentioned here by the name Jesus, that makes him the only one in the visible universe, the known universe, to be able to explain what's going on here. So let's look up close at some of the details where we can make some sense of this. And as we do, let's note that John's vision is not going to fit the seemingly logical schematic image you see on the right side of the screen, where I've just positioned various objects as if they were all in relation to each other. It's all going to blur and merge into this vision that exceeds the bounds of what our logical mind can picture in a square image there. So just allow your imagination to be open as we listen closely to this part of John's vision. As many commentators have noted, the primary question here, as Kester says, is the vision gives readers a glimpse of a rightly ordered universe in which God and the Lamb are central. And so what he sees now is in the right hand, or it could be epitendexion there, at or on the hand. I'm not sure that matters too much. The right hand being, as we see a number of times, as you can see at the note there, the hand of power. Throughout the Hebrew Bible, God's right hand metaphorically is referred to as the power hand. In Latin, right as the Latin root for right is dexterous, and the Latin root for left is sinister, and so we know how those have been associated with positive and negative things. And so the right hand is the power hand of God, the one seated on the throne. A scroll, and you see a scroll here sealed with 7 seals, but the written on the inside and on the back is a little mysterious here. So let's look a little more closely at the words here. As we look down at my note about scroll, you can see this note from Elizabeth Schussler-Fiorenza, According to ancient Oriental mythology, the highest god possesses books or plates in which the destiny of the world is inscribed. In the ritual enthronement of the great king, these books are given to the king as a sign that he now has power over the world. This power entails the rendering of judgment and the execution of justice as the primary role of the emperor. And she's citing there Adela Yarborough Collins, who was one of the foundational people to explore how Revelation is engaging in this mythology of the combat myth, of this battle between 2 opposing forces. But here, of course, the battle's not between a human king and its enemy, but between God and the enemy being empire, as we'll see, empowered by the dragon and the beast. But that's not till much later. We'll also see later the Book of Life as an expression of another book. But this isn't named at that. This is named as a scroll written on the inside and on the back. And that's a little bit tricky here. The inside makes sense as a little notes in the note you see down there. It is complete, finished, nothing can be added, but also there's a possible exterior reading, relative and unimportant, but to the interior reading, the meaning of the text is itself hidden, impossible to obtain without opening the book. So what Lewell's take, as we'll see more notes from him, is that what's going on here is not just the reading of the visible words, but of what's really going on. In other words, reading the situation, not just reading the literal words on the scroll, and the Lamb will be the only one capable of doing that. The question of being written on the inside and on the back, which sort of doesn't make any sense. What's the back of a scroll? If it's round, it doesn't really have a front and a back. But as you can see from my note there, Kessler offers two interpretations. Let me scroll it down so you can see them both. That it could be the text from the front continues onto the back, and that would be called an epistograph in Greek. In other words, it just doesn't fit on one side, so it's continued on the other side. Or it could be the same text on the inside and out. A variation of the outside is a summary of the message on the inside, which is perhaps a little of what Lewell is suggesting. But given the seals in verse 5:3, as we see that no one is able to open or look at it, that seems unlikely. So it certainly could be the case that something on the outside of the scroll could suggest both who it was written to, who the intended recipient was, and maybe a summary, maybe the nature of the kind of document it was to give you a clue. But we don't hear what the content of that is or any distinction explicitly between what's written on the inside and on the back. And it's sealed with 7 seals. And you can see from this image, it was very common, and maybe you've even seen some in your life, to seal with sealing wax, and the imprint would tell you who it was from, and only the authorized person would be able to open it. A very safe way to understand that it reached the intended recipient without being opened if the seals aren't broken. But 7 seals, of course, is very unusual. And those seals, we're going to see in chapter 6 what they are. Here, they're just simply on the scroll and keep it closed. The idea of a seal here, spragusin, first of 13 times in Revelation, it can mean a number of things. Here it's a wax seal, but later we'll see a seal on the forehead of the people who are choosing God, or a seal of those who choose the dragon. So it could be one of various kinds of marks. In this case, though, wax on a scroll. And so he sees the scroll, and then he sees a mighty or a strong angel. Iskoron means strong, the first of 3 strong angels in Revelation. And depending upon your presuppositions about angels, you might be surprised at how these heavenly messengers are described in this book. And proclaiming with a loud voice, although the loud voice is very common, kirusanta, the word for proclaiming, is only here in Revelation, although it's 60 times in the New Testament, highlighting that this isn't just a speech, but a proclamation, a royal proclamation from the throne, and asking this important question. As I just noted, the loud voice, phonin megalon, is 20 times in Revelation. The loud voice clearly contrasting with the loud voices of the imperial religion in the streets of Roman Asia. So having to drown out that by being louder so that you can really hear what's going on. And here's the key question. Who is worthy to open the scroll? And a couple of things from Lewell here and from Kester on the question. So as you can see from Lewell, the seal cannot be broken except by the one to whom the letter is addressed. He now has a title to it. He divulges the information and becomes himself the guarantor of its truth. But Kester notes that the question is peculiar. If a sealed scroll was carried by a messenger, the person qualified to open it was the one to whom the message was addressed. If the scroll was a will, it would be opened after the testator's death by someone with the legal right to do so. But Revelation does not compare God to the absent sender of a message or to the deceased testator of a will. The question is, who is worthy to make the will of the living God known, and by implication to put it in effect? And so the word for worthy here, axios, perhaps familiar to you now from the media outlet by that same name, and it contrasts, as we saw in 4:11, here is who is worthy with that God was worthy, and it's answered in 5:9, which we'll look at next time. So who is worthy to open the scroll and to break its seals? My own note there has the sequence is illogical. Of course, you'd have to break the seals to open the scroll, but again, let's not try to be too logical about the thing. So the verb for to open here matches the door that was opened. So a number of things that are open. First the door to heaven is opened, and now the seals on the scroll will have to be opened, broken and opened. And sadly, the search is made, as you can see in verse 3. No one in heaven or on earth or under the earth was able to open the scroll or to look into it. It's interesting, it doesn't describe looking into the sea, but presumably it's only looking for human interpreters and not any creature from all of creation. So not in the sky or on earth or under the earth is anyone able here, edunato. And note that the question was worthy, and the response is in terms of able, but those are connected. One is only able to if one is worthy. But we don't know yet what the criteria are for worthy, and we're going to find that out very soon. John now responds emotionally, and it's the first time we've seen him express a response to what he's seeing. We'll see more of that as we go. The phrase, as you can see there, to weep bitterly, ekleon polo, literally means to weep much, and as Richard says, symbolizes the anguish of the Christian community, which does not understand history and does not understand why there is persecution and oppression. And we'll see how that theme plays out throughout this section. And so then, while he's weeping, one of the 24 elders, it doesn't say which one, said, "Do not weep." And we'll see how that same parallel response that you see, "do not weep" there in Luke, will be when he's afraid and an angel or an elder will tell him to not be afraid. So he's not to weep, and here's why. And what we hear in verse 5 is a complex web of intertextual references and images that are transformed in this vision. So let's look closely. See here is one of the Edu things. Last episode we noted that Edu was translated in many different ways, but primarily it means behold. It's a pay attention word. So see is not nearly strong enough for the meaning here. So behold, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David. Let's explore some of that in some detail here. So the Lion of the tribe of Judah has two references, as you can see here, to Genesis 49, where Jacob is blessing his sons, and that passage you can see there has been used for many centuries before Jesus as a messianic proclamation of the expectation that the Messiah would come from the tribe of Judah. You can also see the passage from Hosea, which connects the idea of a lion and a Messiah. And so lion is a power animal. It shouldn't be surprising that someone who would be considered strong enough or worthy enough to break a scroll, the lion would be a power animal, perhaps contrasting with the eagle power animal that we saw. And there's a lion already around the throne, along with an eagle. But this is not the same as one of the four living creatures like a lion. This is the Lion of the tribe of Judah. And we'll see the tribe of Judah mentioned again in chapter 7 when 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes are named. But the root of David is a very interesting phrase. We saw earlier key of David, and we're going to see root of David in chapter 22:16, verse 16 later. But this is a combination of what you can see from Isaiah 11:1, the root of Jesse, and then the Messiah would be understood as the branch that comes out of that root, which often the Messianic branch was a phrase used to refer to that. But here it's the root of David. So in that sense, Jesse is the root of David, but of course ultimately the root of David is understood here as the Lamb, the one who is with God from the beginning. So this is indicating messianic power, and the combination of lion, the tribe of Judah, and the root of David would lead us to expect a warrior Messiah, and especially connected with the verb conquered. And something I'd like to note that we haven't been looking at the Greek regularly, but in this verse, as many commentators have noted, as you can see here in the Greek, the edu here, which on the English side is here, is followed immediately by the verb translated on the left as conquered, here as overcome, inaikisen. So literally it's behold, has conquered the Lion of the tribe of Judah. So it's emphasizing the conquest before the description. And what this is juxtaposing is two different forms of what conquest is, and we'll only see the meaning of that as we go, although a hint of it will be in the next verse. So the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the root of David, has conquered. It's a done deal, so to be able to open the scroll and its 7 seals. That's what he heard, but when he looked, when he saw, between or amidst or among the throne and the 4 living creatures and among the elders, a lamb. And so a couple of things here. We're going to see throughout Revelation that John often hears something and then he looks and sees something else. And I'd like to suggest, although there are many possible interpretations of this, that what he hears represents what has been heard, the tradition that he inherits, whether that's the Hebrew scripture or understandings that were common at the time. But when he sees something very different. So what he sees will trump what he hears. And to the extent that Revelation is announcing something new, not the replacement of a religion called Judaism with another religion called Christianity, but with a certain understanding of how the God of Israel would act in the face of the imperial power of Rome in the first century, is changed from a Davidic military Messiah to a slaughtered lamb. And of course that image is consistent with all the Gospels and with Paul, the entire New Testament message rejecting the military messianism of the tradition. But again, not starting a new religion, just reinterpreting what has been heard in terms of what is now being seen on the other side of the veil. So this is where the logic becomes impossible, because if we try to get logical, he saw amidst or among the throne and the living creatures and among the elders. Well, the throne is in one place, and the living creatures are around the throne, and the elders are around the ring of that, as you can see. So it's not logically possible that this lamb can be in all those places, unless it's highlighting, of course, a presence that transcends a particular place here. And that's a little of what we're seeing. So a lamb. So he hears lion and he sees lamb. The power animal is contrasted with a sacrificial animal. This is not yet penal substitutionary atonement, the much later understanding of what the death of Jesus meant, only from the 11th century and on. So it's important that we don't try to impose much later theology onto the text here. As the note from Bauckham, and you can see on the screen, says, there is no substantial evidence that the lamb was already established as a symbol of the Messianic Conqueror in pre-Christian Judaism. It's a new thing here. Arnion, the word for lamb here, is 27 of the 36 New Testament uses are in Revelation, and only in John 1:29 and 36 is a title for Jesus. That's what's led many scholars to associate the Gospel of John with the book of Revelation as both written by somebody named John. But there are many problems with that, and I won't go through all the details, but two just to think of. First of all, the Gospel we know as the Gospel of John never attributes itself to any named author. So that only comes from much later thinking. There are two very different styles of writing here between the very reflective Gospel of John and the apocalyptic book of Revelation. Now, in itself, that does not preclude common authorship. Many scholars have suggested in the past that the style differences suggest different authorships. But many authors can write in many styles. Think of a great author like Shakespeare, who can write sonnets and comedies and tragedies, etc. And I know many academic scholars who also write poetry or fiction. So it's very narrow-minded to suggest that a creative writer could only write in one style. John can plainly write in more than one style, but we don't know that as a fact. So all we know is that the image of Jesus as a lamb is only in the Gospel of John and the book of Revelation. And it's described here with a very misleading translation in the New Revised Standard, as you see, standing as if slaughtered. Standing is fine, but as if is just wrong here. Beale notes it's unnecessary and misleading, and as Kester says, did not suggest that lamb merely appeared to have been slain. It refers to what actually happened. And we see in verse 9, I'm not going to scroll down to it now, we'll see it next time, it describes the slaughtering as an event. The word for slaughtering here, though, esphagmenon, echoes from the Septuagint Isaiah 53:7. But there, it's a little bit different, as you can see from that little quote. It was brought like a lamb to the slaughter, not actually an image of a lamb. And we won't get into the whole imagery of Isaiah's suffering servant here and what that has to do with John's image, but we certainly know that all the Gospels, and Paul as well, but mostly the Gospels and John of Patmos here, call upon that image as the expression of the reversal of the expectation. That the one who is rejected has become the cornerstone, and the lamb who was killed actually represented the way of God. In this context, it clearly represents also accepting violence rather than inflicting it. So the vision of receiving the violence of empire rather than pouring it out upon your opponents. And this slaughtered lamb has 7 horns and 7 eyes, which makes for a little bit of a bizarre image, but we'll see what that means in just a moment. The horn keratau is one of the many names for comets, as Melina said, so if we want to read this astronomically, we can see that the eyes were stars and the horns are comets as an interpretation of literally what's being seen in the sky, interpreted through the tradition. But it's also interpreted as kings in other places. Just as the lamb is a common image, or sheep, in something in text like First Enoch. So we can see here that in the apocalypse of weeks in the book of Enoch, which is from the time of the Maccabees in the 2nd century BCE, when there was a similar kind of question of how to respond to an oppressive empire, in that case of the Seleucid Greeks, the Maccabees chose to act with violence, but Enoch expresses an alternative here and refers constantly to God as the Lord of the sheep. And so just scrolling through this, you can see how many times God is referred to as the Lord of the sheep in that passage. And in that, the people of God are also referred to as sheep in the face of the violent predators who take them on. So in that sense, the lamb could be seen as a collective expression of the embodiment of Israel from the Enoch tradition, which also shares in the human one or Son of Man tradition that we see elsewhere. Enoch, certainly an apocalyptic text that has a lot of imagery shared with the book of Revelation. So it's 7 horns and it's 7 eyes. The eyes of the Lord here, as is seen in a number of passages, and as you can see explicitly in this Zechariah passage from chapter 4 that connects the 7 spirits being sent out of the earth, the final phrase there in verse 6 here in our passage. So the 7 eyes, which are the 7 spirits of God, but we'd seen that in the previous scene, the 7 spirits of God were the 7 flaming torches. And so, as Bauckham notes there, in Revelation, the eyes of Yahweh are also the eyes of the Lamb, which is why it's impossible for us to try to be logical here, as if we have to choose between one or the other. And as opposed to the menorah that you see on the screen, they're fixed in one place, the 7 flames. These 7 spirits are sent out into all the earth. So this is a combination of the imagery from Zechariah 4 and what we'll see later in the 2nd scroll, the witnesses in the street of the great city, that the Lamb is on a mission, not like the human one in Enoch, who stays on the other side of the veil, but we'll see, of course, through the human Jesus, but also with the apocalyptic Lamb sent out to try to bring into New Jerusalem all of those who have been lured and seduced by empire. And so, having been found worthy, he went, which is, again, try to be logical about this. Where is he going? He's already there. So I would take that as simply the reaching out to take the scroll. But whether it's being taken or received, as you can see there, the form of the verb lambano here can mean to receive rather than to take. So it's not so much he's taking it away, but it's being handed over to him from the right hand of the one seated on the throne. So with that verse, we have the successful answer to the question, and that will lead to this grand celebration, not only of the one on the throne, but of the Lamb. And we'll see how that goes next time. See you then. Bye-bye.